How do you pass the Language Arts and Reading subtest of the Elementary Education K-6 exam? What are the big concepts you need to know? Do you know them? My name's Scott Roselle, and in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the exact concepts you need to know to be successful and pass the Language Arts and Reading subtest of the FTCE Elementary Education K-6. I know that's a mouthful, but I wanted to let you know specifically what we were going to be covering. So how do I know what's on the test? Well, as the founder of 240 Tutoring, we make the best FTCE study guides available. And as we create the study guides, we go through to find out exactly what's on the test so we know exactly what information we need to give our customers. And in this video, I'm gonna walk you through those big concepts that we know are going to be on the test. So keep watching. Now, just as a quick overview, you're gonna have 65 minutes to answer the 60 multiple choice questions for the Language Arts subtest. And the Language Arts subtest can be neatly divided into 5 sections. Those 5 sections are reading process, literary analysis and genres, language and the writing process, literacy instruction and assessment, communication and media literacy. So let's get started with the biggest, reading process. This section really comes down to, do you know the reading process, how students learn to read and kind of how they read, and can you help students along in that process? Now, reading process questions make up 29% of the test, give or take. So it's incredibly important that you understand the big concepts in this section. And those 3 big concepts is emergent literacy, text analysis, and teaching strategies. Now, emergent literacy is really what a student understands about reading and writing before they can read and write. It's simply the first step in the literacy process, and literacy is just learning how to read and write. So this is what happens before students can read and write. It's the knowledge they have before. So for this section, make sure you know what phonological awareness is, decoding, and the concept of print. Those key words will show up on the test, and you have to know what they mean to be able to get those questions right. Now, text analysis is simply knowing the main parts of comprehension. And comprehension is basically understanding something. So text analysis is really understanding and comprehending the text a student is reading. So brush up on terms like main idea, supporting details, author's purpose, point of view, inference, and conclusion. It's those kind of words and ideas that are gonna come up on the test, especially under text analysis. And if you know what those words are and how they fit into really understanding reading, you'll do great on those questions. And the last big concept for reading process is teaching strategies. And this is simply the strategies, specific strategies you will use to teach reading. So you need to know the best practices for teaching things like decoding skills, vocabulary development, and reading comprehension. And be sure you know the components of reading fluency. And this involves things like the rate at which a student reads, the automaticity of sight words, and other key areas. And be sure you know the components of fluency. Now, fluency is just how well and how fluent a student reads. And the main components to know are accuracy, automaticity, rate, prosody. Now, I just gave you a lot of information, and I want to break some of those terms that I've referenced down a little bit more so you're more comfortable on the test. I mentioned phonological awareness. Now, phonological awareness is just the ability to hear the smallest units of sound. The smallest unit of sound is known as a phoneme, and so if you have phonological awareness, you can break down a word based on how it sounds. So for bat, B-A-T, at. Each of those letters represents a specific phoneme, and students need to be able to distinguish between those. They need to be aware of the phonological parts of the word in order to be able to continue in the reading process. Now, concepts of print is really understanding how reading works, like how a book works. You go left to right, individual letters are combined to make words, words combined to make sentences, and individual letters represent units of sound. So concepts of print is really, does the student understand how print works, how the concept of print works? And the last one I mentioned was fluency, and I gave you 4 terms you may not have heard before, at least not in the terms of reading fluency. So I just want to touch on those really quickly. Accuracy is just reading words correctly. Automaticity is knowing the words right away. So when you see and or but or so, you don't really have to sound it out or really think about it. You just know what that word means. That's automaticity. It's automatic. Rate is simply how many words a student can read per minute. And prosody is really how well you sound. So does the student sound like a robot when they read, or can they properly insert inflection into their read aloud time? Now, the next section is literary analysis and genres. Now, this section is just being aware of the different types of genres of books and being able to relate and discuss them intelligently. This section makes up 16% of the language arts subtest. And there are 3 big concepts that you need to know: types of genres, literary devices, teaching strategies. Now, types of genres is very simple. It's just knowing what kind of books are out there. And by the different kinds of books, you got science fiction, fiction, nonfiction, and then within nonfiction, you got biographies or historical narrative. There's just a lot of different genres, and you need to know at a high level what they are and what separates them. The next is literary devices, and these are just things that authors use to make their stories or the words they use extra special. Literary devices include things like similes, metaphors, onomatopoeia, things that really help you understand what's being said and make it stick in your mind, stand out. And the last is teaching strategies. And this is really understanding how to choose the best book for your class and then the best way to present the information in that book to your students. So those are the 3 big concepts to understand. I'm gonna touch on a few specific concepts that are quite likely to show up. The first is realistic fiction. And these are stories that could happen in real life, but they haven't. Think stories like Shiloh. And the key difference about this genre is that there's nothing really fantastical or mystical about them. It's very realistic, and it's something that could plausibly happen. The next concept is evidence-based discussions. And evidence-based discussion is really when students use information from the book, plot, a specific excerpt or a quote, to justify and explain their answers or comments in a group discussion. So really, evidence-based discussion is just using evidence to base your answer or your comment on during a discussion. And the last specific concept in this section is multicultural text. And multicultural texts are really about books or genres that represent minorities in our culture. So these are people based on race, ethnicity, gender that typically don't have a mainstream representation in genres. They're multicultural and they represent multiple cultures. Now, if all this seems like a lot of information and you feel like you're gonna have to go hunt around the internet just to find all this out, don't worry. As I said before, at 240 Tutoring, we have the best study guides for these tests. So all these concepts I've mentioned and many more can be found fully explained with authentic practice questions in our study guides. All you have to do is go to 240tutoring.com, look for the study guide for this subtest, and you'll be on your way to passing it in no time. Now, let's get back to the video and discussing the language arts subtest. The third section we're going to be discussing is the language and writing process. And this section is really all about the writing process. So you need to know how students develop in the writing process, what the writing process is, and how to effectively teach the writing process. The language and writing process section makes up 16% of the language arts subtest. And there are 4 big concepts in this section that you really need to know: the developmental stages of writing, the writing process, the modes of writing, and teaching strategies. Now, the first big concept is the developmental stages of the writing process. And this really takes when students are hardly understanding how to write, they're just scribbling, to being fully formed writers. And the stages of writing development are scribbling, then mock letters, then letter formation, then word writing or writing words, then constructing sentences, and then finally spelling, punctuation, and grammatical expression. So you need to be familiar with each stage of the writing process and a student's characteristics in each one. This will help you identify, especially on the test, if you have a writing sample from a student, what developmental stage they're in, and how best to engage them in instruction. Now, that is the stages of the developmental writing process. The next concept you need to know is the writing process, which is very different. The writing process really focuses on a specific project or assignment and how a student should progress through from receiving the assignment to completing it. So the stages of the writing process are pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. So a student's activities at each of those stages will be a little bit different with a specific purpose in progressing the project along. So you need to make sure you understand what each stage is and the purpose of it and what students' activities in each stage need to be. The third concept is the modes of writing. And the modes of writing is just describing the different ways that students can write. The 3 main modes are narrative, informational or explanatory, and then argument. So make sure you know the differences between a narrative text, an informational or expository text, and an argument. Now, the last big concept to know is teaching strategies. Now, teaching strategies really relies on understanding what the writing conventions are and how to teach the writing conventions to students. Writing conventions include things like spelling, punctuation, capitalization, syntax, and word usage. And really all those are just combining together to teach the craft of writing. Now, I did mention a few things within the big concepts that are very likely to appear on the test, and I want to focus in on these specific concepts so you can be better prepared. The first is revising versus editing. Now, revising is really dealing with the presentation of the message, so moving words and sentences around to better communicate your ideas. Editing is just fixing spelling and grammatical and punctuational errors. Now, another specific concept that I mentioned earlier is narrative writing. Narrative writing is very likely to come up on the test, and you need to know the characteristics, like it has a plot, characters, a general arc of a conflict within the story. So knowing the basic characteristics of narrative writing and how you can communicate that to students so that they can too write their own narratives is very important. Now, the last specific concept is figurative language, and this is really just when you use words in a different way than normal. And figurative language includes things like alliteration, hyperbole, metaphor, onomatopoeia, personification, or simile. So understanding that figurative language, or as we referenced earlier, literary devices, and how students can incorporate that into their writing to make their writing more effective is going to go a long way on the test. Now, the fourth concept we're going to talk about is literary instruction and assessment. And this really falls along knowing how to teach and then assess students' knowledge of the reading and writing process. Literary instruction and assessment is going to make up 23% of the language arts subtest. And there are three big concepts you need to know: teaching strategies, literacy assessment, and data analysis. Now, teaching strategies might seem redundant because we've covered it in so many sections before, and it kind of is. And it really boils down to knowing how to teach students how to read and write. And if this is a big theme that keeps appearing in all the other concepts, then it's probably a big indicator that you need to focus on understanding these teaching strategies and how to teach students how to read and write, because that's mainly what you'll be doing as a teacher. Now, there are a few best practices you can use within this, and it's kind of instructional activities. There are things like literature circles, small groups, reading workshops, writing workshops, and reading centers. So understanding what those specific concepts are and how to implement them in the classroom is going to be imperative. The next big concept in this section is literary assessment. And literacy assessment's really understanding how you can assess a student's progress in their literacy. So you need to be able to give students a variety of assessments, be able to interpret the variety of assessments, and combine it all into a clear, cohesive picture of a student's progress. And there's four big different kinds of assessments, and they are norm-referenced assessments, criterion-referenced assessments, diagnostic assessments, and curriculum-based assessments. Now, just as a side note, you have to know the difference between a norm-referenced assessment and a criterion-referenced assessment. That will come up on the test, and that could be the difference between passing and failing. So make sure you find out exactly what the difference is between those two. And if you want a quick way to learn that, just get a 240 Tutoring study guide. And then the last big concept is data analysis. And data analysis kind of builds on what I said earlier about being able to take all the information from all the assessments and all that data and analyze it into one cohesive picture. And this data really should be able to guide you on how you create materials for students, how you create curriculum, and then also how you engage students with teaching. Are they responding to various methods, maybe better or worse? Now let's move on to the fifth and final section, communication and media literacy. This section really comes on to knowing how to communicate with students and use technology in the classroom. And this section is going to make up 16% of the test. Now that might seem small, but a lot of the information that includes kind of bleeds into the other areas, so it's important to pay attention. And the three big concepts you need to know here is communication techniques, technology, and again, teaching strategies. The first big concept is communication techniques. And this really means how you engage and communicate with others, specifically your students. Now, a few aspects of communication techniques can include things like questioning, paraphrasing, eye contact, voice, and gestures. Now, of course, there's way more than that, but I just wanted to give you an idea about when I say communication techniques, what that entails. Now, for one of the big concepts, it was teaching strategies. Now, this can seem, again, redundant, but in this particular section, it's teaching strategies to develop students' listening and speaking skills. And these really focus on a student's ability to engage in conversation, understand what's being said, and possibly present or communicate information of their own to an individual or to a group. And finally, the last big concept's technology. You're gonna need to know the big kinds of technology used in the classroom and the most appropriate way to use them. There is a right and wrong way to use technology. It's very important to know that. Not all technology is good. Not all technology can be used well in a classroom. And so some of the big things being used in classrooms today, some big technology things, are things like smartboards, Chromebooks, iPads, digital textbooks, cameras, and networked learning. The ed tech sphere is a huge sphere, and there's constantly things going out. So there's constantly things to learn. So just spend a little bit of time orienting yourself with the big technological movements in education and how they're used effectively in the classroom. Now, one specific concept to really know in communication media literacy is active listening. Now, active listening is really being completely focused on who's speaking. So you're listening to me right now. You need to be fully focused because I'm giving you great information here. So active listening involves much more than just actually hearing the words, but blocking everything else out so the speaker has your full attention. Now, I'm gonna go over a few example questions, but just so you know that all the concepts discussed here, plus many, many more, and hundreds of authentic practice questions can be found in the 240 Tutoring Study Guide. So make sure to go to 240tutoring.com, just look at the study guide. We have free samples so you can get more practice questions, more elaborated specific content for the language arts subtest. It's gonna be a huge help in getting you towards passing that K-6 exam. Students in a 4th grade classroom are having difficulty with their oral language skills. The teacher knows that they must have many opportunities for the development of these skills, which includes listening, speaking, and understanding. Which answer below is not a purpose of speaking orally as a part of the process of oral language development? A, giving and/or clarifying information. B, making good appropriate word choices. C, getting practice in clear pronunciation. D, practicing in schema development. Now take the time and really try to answer the question. You can pause the video if you need to. I'm about to give you the answer and the explanation. The correct answer is D. Schema development is determining a structure of knowledge about anything. It is a comprehension skill and not specifically related to oral language development. A teacher wants to develop reading fluency in his 1st grade class. Which of the following would be the most effective activity to enhance the student's reading fluency? A, creating a graphic organizer after reading a student-chosen book. B, engaging in a literary discussion group in the library. C, reading a book or essay on a level above the student's independent reading level. Or D, rereading stories that were used during a guided reading activity. The correct answer is D. Students acquire reading fluency and comprehension from books read during guided reading lessons with the teacher. Repeated readings with familiar books improve reading fluency. For their morning work, a 5th grade teacher has students dissect the word disconnected. The students are required to break the word into a prefix, a root word, and a suffix. Students then hypothesize the meaning of the word. Which of the following skills will this help develop? A, blending onsets and rhymes. B, decoding. C, phonemic awareness. D, blending phonemes. The correct answer is B. Using structural and morphemic clues to find the meaning of the word will promote a student's decoding skills. Which of the following most contributes to students' vocabulary development? A, independent reading. B, explanation of the importance of phonemic awareness. C, writing word definitions. D, direct instruction of vocabulary word. The correct answer is A. Research shows the best way to increase vocabulary is through reading because it allows the students to see the words in context. Read the 2 sentences below and answer the question. Which aspect of the revised sentence was improved? A, word choice. B, sentence fluency. C, writing conventions. D, organization. Correct answer is A. Sentence fluency is the rhythm and flow of a sentence. The fluency of the sentence was not changed or revised. Writing conventions are the tools and mechanics that structure a written language. Examples of writing conventions are spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar. There are no writing convention changes from the original sentence to the revised sentence. So those were just a few practice questions to give you an idea about what's going to be on the test. If you want a better idea or you want more questions, more instructional content, or more flashcards, just go to 240tutoring.com and get the 240 Tutoring K-6 Language Arts Subtest Study Guide. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. Look forward to hearing from you.